It's the all-important semi-finals of the FIDE World Cup 2023. On your screen is the current world number 2, Fabiano Caruana, with a rating of 2791. Live rating, he is an amazing player. Brilliant at calculations, absolutely strong in his opening prep. And today, he takes on the 18-year-old prodigy, Praggnanandhaa, the phenom from India, who's played brilliantly at this tournament, eliminating Hikaru Nakamura, and is now through to the semi-finals and also the candidates tournament. Pragg has shown great resilience, especially in his quarterfinals encounter against Arjun Erigaisi, and this is the first game of their classical match. Caruana opens with 1 e4, and while Fabi has taken off his jacket, Pragg keeps it on. As always, Pragg likes to take his time in the opening. He has developed this new ritual where he doesn't really close his eyes, he's observing the board, maybe then tries to focus himself, calms himself down, and tries to get in the right mindset before making his move. And he has a few options up his sleeve. Sicilian is something that Pragg has played before. Also, he has played e4, e5. Let's see what he's going to do today. Caruana, extremely calm there. He plays e5. And now, this might be either Ruy Lopez or Italian. Let's see, knight comes out to f3. And Praggnanandhaa develops his knight to c6. Important moment. Is it bishop c4 or bishop b5? It's actually bishop c4. We have the Italian. And Pragg is one big expert in this, but Fabi is an even bigger expert in the Italian. c3 played. And Pragg brings his knight out to f6. It's a direct line with d4, but the more positional lines go d3 and they lead to much more complex games, much more fighting chess with more opportunities for both sides to go wrong. Pragg now takes a bit of time and plays his pawn up to a6. It's a useful move, and generally Pragg, we have seen, likes to keep his pawn on a6 and not on a5. That's how he's played. Bishop goes to g5. The trend of developing your bishop early to g5 continues in top-level modern chess. And that too before white-black has castled. So Pragg asks a question to the bishop. Do you want to take on f6? Of course not, says Fabi. And now g5 is a very viable way to play. You can never sacrifice your knight in that position. But first Pragg goes d6. And Caruana develops his knight to d2. So all pretty normal until now. In fact, there have been many top-level games that have gone through this variation. Bishop a7 played by Pragg, just removing the bishop from a d4 tempo that would hit it. It goes to a7, and now white simply castles. And would Pragg also castle here is the question, because once you castle, this pin becomes a little more threatening. So queen e7 played by Pragg, and one of the ideas is to put your bishop on e6, and if he takes, to take with the queen, breaking the pin. b4 played by Fabi, gaining space on the queen side. And now Pragg plays his bishop to e6, offering a trade. What is Caruana going to do here? Is he going to take on e6, or is he going to gain even more space with a4? That's one of the main moves in the position. And he does it. He plays his pawn to a4. He has 1 hour 31 minutes on the clock. Pragg now has to decide what to do here. He goes short castles. Yes, he plays it. His king is safe now. He's not too worried about this pin because he knows he can at any point take on c4 and break the pin with queen e6. Here, rook e1 is played, and generally this move is very useful, defending the pawn on e4 and preparing pawn to d4. That's why the rook often is very well placed there. Bishop takes bishop has happened, and now you want to take with the knight. Yes, that's how you take it. This knight on c4 is very interestingly placed. At some moments it can go to a5 and attack d7, and at some moments it can go to e3 and look at these two squares. Pragg goes queen e6, and he tells Fabi that, look, I'm going to get my knight off the board very soon, so you need to think about your bishop. Then it would do nothing here, so might as well you want to exchange it. Well, b5 is played by Fabi. He tries to create his play, and taking here might not be the best idea because it opens up the rook. So first Pragg goes knight to e7, and he's okay if Caruana takes here to take back. That is fine for him. Now rook to b1 is a small innovation by Fabi. Earlier, some games have gone bishop f6, queen f6 and rook b1, because then the bishop is no longer sort of misplaced slightly on h4. So for Pragg, after rook b1, a clear idea, and you can see he's taking his time, is to go g5, kick this bishop away and then continue the game. That could be one way to play because his opponent hasn't taken. The other way is to remove the knight from f6 and maybe put it on d7 so that it can look at the c5 and b6 squares. Pragg is taking his time at this moment, and rightly so, because Caruana's move hasn't been played very often. This has been, however, played in the game by one of the games of Amin Tabatabai against Yu Yang. He goes knight to d7. An interesting move by Pragg, as we noted that he wanted his knight to be taken off from the f6 square. Now Caruana sits down and realizes that if he's not careful, then this knight could move away, and so he takes on e7. And then the bishop has done its job. It's taken here, and now queen takes e7. So we have an imbalance here. Black has a beautiful bishop on this diagonal. White has very nice knight placed on c4 and also space on the queen side. And Caruana now next makes a fantastic move d4. The point of this is that Praggnanandhaa now has to deal with these pawns. If he takes ever, then after pawn takes, white has a brilliant center. But on the other hand, white can never really take on e5 because then the bishop opens up. And you can never push forward with d5 because then the c5 square is weak. So Pragg comes up with the queen and he kind of tempts Fabi, please push the pawn so that I can go back now and then I can come here to the c5 square with my knight. Of course, Caruana, being the player that he is never going to get tempted by the move d5. So what does he do? A good way is to maintain all the tension in the position and defend this knight on c4 by queen to d3. And maybe that is the best way to continue here. Caruana is thinking. Other options do include queen to b3. You don't want to go to a5 and attack this because bishop b6 and the knight is not doing much there. It could get trapped. So queen d3, fantastic move played by Fabi. And Caruana is just very slightly putting pressure on Pragg. Pragg has to now decide what to do. One of white's plan is knight e3 and going to f5 or d5. So rook e8 makes a lot of sense, keeping pressure on d4, but Pragg goes rook b8. And in fact, now Caruana can actually play for this plan knight e3. It's not at all a bad idea. The knight could jump here or to the f5 square. But there are other ways to play this position, and one of them is to take here on a6, take here, and then use your knight to attack these weak squares on c6, b7. Also, when the knight jumps here, okay, he's taken first of all. This is getting very exciting now because Pragg has to respond by taking back. For now, Pragg is not at the board. He is, there he's back, and he takes back, b takes a6. And here's the move that we are thinking about, knight a5, attacking the c6 square, and also attacking the a6 pawn. Very important, this pawn on a6 is a weakness. Meanwhile, white has a very strong center. So black's position does look pretty bad. Caruana takes on b8 here. Now, for Pragg, it's a question. Should you take with the knight? But if you take with the knight, then after de, knight e5, you lose a pawn. So you don't want to take with the knight. If you don't take with the knight, you can take with the bishop, but the bishop is kind of misplaced here. It was on a good diagonal and I can just rotate my knight to this good square. So the other option comes rook takes b8. But if you notice, this is the most natural move, right? Why is Pragg thinking so much? Well, the reason is he's unhappy with the move knight a5 here. Because now the threat is to come here to c6. And the most important point to note here is that if you try to stop the knight from coming here, the knight anyway jumps in and attacks the bishop. If you take, there is d5 and Pragg. You can see there is a time lapse that we've put, which shows Pragg thinking about this position for nearly 20 minutes. To this position, there is a very nice resource with knight c5. Because if you take, now I can take and there is no d5. So Pragg is calculating all these deep lines when actually the rook is taken. And finally, he takes back rook takes b8. Clearly, he's found something in the line which has made him go for this. But, for many out there, this was just a simple recapture. But actually, Pragg has thought for more than 25 minutes there. Knight comes to a5, just as we imagined. Now the knight is coming to c6. How is Pragg going to respond to this? Rook b6 is playable. It's in fact the best move. But then this knight c6, you have to see all the complicated lines here. Rook b6, knight c6, knight c5. And then if the queen moves away, then you take d5. You are ready to sacrifice an exchange and so on. These are the complex lines that you have to calculate after rook b6. But Pragg decides to take on d4. And Pragg's point is that if you take here, I'm pretty happy because now I got d5. My queen defends this. So Caruana makes the intermezzo. He puts his knight on c6 and attacks the rook and the bishop. Now Pragg must find the next move, which he actually must have seen when he was thinking for 20 minutes. And the next move is to play knight to c5. Fantastic move played by Pragg. Two options. One is to take the pawn. The other one is to simply move the queen behind. Why would you play this? The reason is I'm attacking the rook and the bishop. And let's say the rook saves the bishop. Then now I get two connected pawns. That is the main reason. However, here you can take d takes c3. And if he plays knight a7, then rook b2 and black is winning this position. And if you play knight takes b8, then bishop b8 and black has excellent compensation. So Caruana may not want to move his queen back to d1. He may want to take on d4 with the queen. But once he does that, the issue is that his structure becomes slightly broken up. But that's the thing about these top level players. They are more about concrete calculations and less about just feel. Now, rook is attacked, bishop is attacked, rook b7 would be a huge blunder. There's a fork coming in here. So that's the reason why Pragg plays rook a8, the best move in the position. Now, Caruana has a great move here, which is to play pawn to a5. Now, why is this such a special move? The reason is that once you push your pawn to a5, which he does, the bishop cannot move out. Once the bishop cannot move out, the rook cannot move because then the bishop would fall. So all in all, this is a very, very dangerous position for Pragg. He goes queen e8, asks the knight if you want to dislodge yourself because now rook takes would be completely fine for black. But Caruana has an excellent move here, which is queen to d5, defending the knight. Will he find it? And if he plays it, then Pragg is, yes, he finds it, he plays it. Pragg actually here has an only move to be fine in the game. Otherwise, he's much worse here. And that move is knight d3. Just look at this move. It unleashes the bishop on f2 square. And you might ask, can the queen simply not take the knight? Well, the point is, I'll take back your knight. And that's the reason why knight d3 works. And Pragg finds it. Of course, he's so sharp positionally. He managed to find, oh, but Fabi has an intermezzo. He gives a check. He's like, Pragg, if you take my knight, I'll take your rook with the check. And Pragg is ready with that move as well. He's seen it. Maybe you go, king h8 makes a lot of sense. You don't want to go to h7 because after queen takes d3, e5 would lead to a discovered check. So king goes to h8, and now the problem is this is hanging and this is hanging. And if you go rook f1, there's knight f4, which is very powerful. So he takes, Pragg now takes on e7. So the position has simplified a bit. But the position still remains very dangerous, and Caruana's next move shows such deep understanding here. He's taken off back rank threats. He's bringing the king to g2. Clearly, he cannot take the pawn right now because of bishop f2 check, and he loses the queen. Pragg goes bishop c5. He just improves the position of his bishop. White holds all the trumps. There's a weakness on a6. There's an ability to break e5, and he goes knight d4, but not the best move because now Pragg can actually take pawn takes and create counterplay with c5, and in such a position black should be completely fine. But instead he goes queen d7. He plays his queen here, an inaccurate move. He wants to come to a4. If Fabi is not very careful, the queen can go here, attack this, put pressure here, but queen c4 is such a classy move by Caruana. He's stopping the queen from coming to a4, and now with 10 more moves to make and Pragg going low on time, it's actually big trouble here. Pragg has less than 10 minutes on the clock. He goes king g8 now. Caruana again a quiet nice little move, king g2, improving the position of his king. Pragg has to decide what is the way in which he creates counterplay, because now bishop d4 is also met with c takes d4. So he goes rook a7. Kind of unusual move. Not really sure what his aim is, because if Caruana improves his position, yes, he does. Rook b1. Threatening maybe rook b8 check, infiltrating with this rook. What is Pragg actually doing? It's very difficult to say. Maybe his last move was aimed against defending the b7 square and a6 pawn. And now with queen e8, which he plays, he's now stopped the rook from entering into b8. So in this way, he's assumed a very strong defensive position. He's also attacking the e4 pawn. And now knight going back seems logical, but Caruana goes queen d5, another powerful move. Perhaps the knight can again sit down on c6. That would be too dangerous. Well, maybe I can just take on d4. Yes, he takes it. Bishop takes d4 has happened. And now pawn takes on d4 is played. If he plays c6 now, that's decent, because if you take, there is queen takes e4. But maybe c6, queen f5 can come. So Pragg first goes g6, but that is not a good idea now. One of the best moves in the position, very tough to play, is king f3, defending e4. But he goes e5. And now we are on to move number 35. Pragg has to decide what to do here. Maybe he can take the pawn, and he takes it. Pawn takes pawn. And he has an idea now. After Caruana most likely will also recapture back with his pawn, black will have an additional weakness on c7. Yes, he does. But Pragg can now move into a rook endgame by putting his queen on a8, and that's an important move to play. Yes, he plays it. Queen a8. We are going into a rook endgame, but still the problems have not been solved. Now you can take here, rook takes, but that improves the position of the black rook. So why don't we go queen f3? This is a very subtle move, and Fabi finds it. What a move! Because now if black takes, I'll take with my king and activate my king this way with white. And on the other hand, black does not have too many moves. The queen can't move, the rook cannot move anywhere, and so Pragg now kind of lashes out with c5, which is logical because you're pushing your passed pawn, but you have weakened the b6 square. And this b6 square is so important. If the rook sits there, it's going to be a monster, and Fabi instantly takes that square. He's taken the rook there, and he wants to place his rook on c6 and then capture the pawn on c5. So Pragg first takes the queen. King takes on f3 has happened. We are on move number 39, so this is critical moment in the game. Now Caruana here definitely feels he's better. Pragg pushes his pawn to c4. It's very important now to not get tempted with rook c6 instantly and to actually improve your king here, king e3. This is still maybe holdable after a move like rook d7, but he goes rook c6, and this is move number 40, and Pragg finds the best defensive move. What a move by Pragg. And the point that Pragg says is that if you take rook c4, I have rook d5, hitting e5 and a5. And there you can see Pragg getting up from the board. Now 30 minutes added on the clock. Caruana's last move actually drops his advantage quite seriously. He should have brought his king in to stop the pawn, but instead he went with his rook, and now with rook d7, coming to d5, attacking here. One idea is king e4. This could be played, but then rook d2, attacking here, and let's say I play f4, then you lose the pawn, rook takes a6. Again, very difficult to calculate, but after rook g2, maybe this pawn is hanging, the h pawn is coming down the board, it can become a very sharp endgame. The other option for Caruana is to take the pawn on a6, but even there, it's not so simple, because rook takes a6, I would push the pawn down the board, c3, he takes it, he takes on a6, and now Pragg can actually play rook d5, which is a good move, which keeps the king cut off here, or he can play c3, and this is a very important moment. He plays pawn to c3, and now the pawn is sort of moving down the board, so you need to go rook c6 to stop it, and that would be an important move for Fabi. He is thinking, he goes rook c6, and now you don't go rook d5. Rook d5 is a massive blunder, because after a6, rook a5, king e3, the king comes and stops the pawn. The move here is the very powerful rook a7. Praggnanandhaa finds it. Rook a7 is a classy move. a5 is hanging, and Fabi can save the pawn with playing pawn to a6, but after c2, the pawn is about to queen, and when white takes the pawn, rook takes a6 is hanging. a6 played, and now very natural for Pragg to push his c pawn down the board. He does it. The white king can no longer stop this pawn, so he takes rook takes c2, and after rook takes a6, now we reach a new endgame. Now many experienced players would have known that there is a famous game between Piquet Kasparov here, 4 versus 3, where actually Garry Kasparov lost with the 3 pawns. However, this position, Praggnanandhaa has a lot of time. It's a classical game. It's not a blitz game, and he will be able to hold this. This is not a tough one to hold. And he goes back king g8. One of the plans that Pragg should be planning to do is to go h5 and sort of make his pawn structure very strong. On the other hand, the rook can be placed here, stopping e6 move, or it can go down and start creating threats here. Rook d7 played by Fabi. Of course, Caruana has all the right in the world to play and continue fighting for the full point, but objectively Pragg is fine. Rook a3 check. Now where do you play the king? One is you can go back, and it's not so silly because you want to play f4 and then maybe get your king out from the other side. But Caruana goes king e4. But when you play king e4, now actually Pragg can create some play with rook a2 attacking the f2 pawn. He goes rook a1. Very interesting choice by Pragg. Is a move like e6 dangerous? Well, it could be, but if you take here and then the king tries to enter this way, but rook e1 check just kind of is clean. So here h4 played by Fabi, and Pragg responds back with h5, gaining some space. How should White make any plans here? He goes f3, and maybe Caruana has this idea in mind, which is to play g4, take, and create an edge passer. That is what he wants to do. And Praggnanandhaa is not really impressed. He gives a check, and he tells Fabi that your king doesn't have anywhere to hide, but Caruana brings his rook back, and now Pragg plays rook to a3. He's attacking here. He's tied up the white king. And then after king f4, now king comes up to g7. Well, Caruana now has to do something active because he doesn't have too many plans. He goes g4. He breaks on the king side. Pragg takes the pawn. H takes g4. And it has to be recaptured. F takes g4 played. The only kind of winning plan that White could have is go king g5, rook d7, and maybe try for e6. That seems like a logical plan. Or you go h5, takes, king f5, sort of deflect the king and try to win the f pawn. That could be another plan. But Pragg is very alert. He goes rook a5 and he doesn't really... he keeps an eye on the e pawn. h5 played. And the more pawns that are getting traded, the more the game is moving towards a draw. G takes h5, Caruana has to take, and now Pragg has a very, very direct way to hold a draw here. He can keep waiting with rook a6 or rook a1 or all these moves, but he goes f6. Classy move, very classy. If you take here, I can take back and the h pawn is going nowhere. And if you give a check, I can go king f8, and then when you take, I can take this h5 pawn. So Caruana kind of tries to improve a bit. He goes h6 check. Well, Pragg could actually take the pawn, and he does so. King takes. He sees that if you play pawn takes pawn, then king g6, and you lose this pawn. But he has this move rook d6. Interesting move played by Caruana, pinning the pawn here. King comes back to g7, and once the king comes in front of the pawn, it would be a draw. But after rook f6, he's cut the king off. So still, Pragg has to be very careful here, because if White can get his rook down the board and then the pawn pushes up, there could be Lucena positions happening here. Rook a1, king f5 played. And now Pragg can wait. He's being very careful. He plays his rook to a2, and he's just hanging there. Could check from this side, could check from the other side. So he's just waiting. He's just waiting here. Rook goes to b6. And the point of this move now, of course, is to give a check here. That's the most important point. But the way in which Pragg defends now is something we can all learn from. First, he goes king f7. Check here. And now you need to put your king in front of the pawn. So king e8 makes a lot of sense. Oh, he goes king f8, which is also fine, which is also good. Now, if you go king e6, there is check from the other side. So he goes king f6. And now if you give a check from a6, there is e6. So you have to give a check from f2. And after king e6 was played here, now the important move here, very, very critical to know it so that you can draw this with ease, is the move rook e2. This move would be a very strong move. And I would like to explain to you why. And once Pragg makes that move, if he's going to, it's called the advanced Philidor. The point is that if I give you a check, let's say you come here and I move my king, I'll then go to f7 and you can no longer play e6 check. So he's first given a check, king g7. And now if king d6, there is king f7 and there's no way to check because I placed my rook there. That's the important point. He goes rook e8 and he tells Pragg that I want to go here and then push because my rook defends. But Pragg says, you've given up your long side and I'm going to check from the sides now. So again, important, you stay behind the pawn here or you stay on the sides. He gives rook d8. And now actually Pragg can go back to e2 because if you give a check, he may block with his rook. It's quite possible. So not to be too creative, just go behind the pawn. Rook d1 played and he's hoping to somehow cut the king off, maybe from f1, maybe from giving a check there. So Pragg has to once again be careful. He goes king f8. He finds the good defense because if you give a check, I'm coming to e8 here. The king is well placed in front of the pawn. So Fabi also, you can see, knows that Praggnanandhaa knows how to hold this endgame. He goes for a check and Pragg now, well, king g8, e8, both are fine, but king e8 is fine technique. You stay in front of the passer, king e8, and now Caruana can threaten a mate in one by bringing his rook here to the check. And important now is to go to the short side. This is the short side because the pawn cuts the board into two sides. This is the long side, this is the short side. King f8 is good because the reason why king f8 is good is because the king goes to the short side, the rook can go to the long side to give checks. Rook e1, still waiting. So that's the point. Whenever such a position comes, keep the rook behind the pawn, check, king goes to g7, and we know the drawing method. If king d6, there is king f7. And that's the point. He goes king d6, and what's the move now? Pragg knows it beforehand. That's the reason why he was playing this defense all along. King f7 played, and now it's no longer e6 coming with a check because I can take back with a check. So he goes rook a5, and now Pragg gives a check, and Fabi puts the rook in. But this is an admission of sort of truce. You're going to draw the game, takes. Caruana kind of pressed really hard there, but Pragg has defended excellently, and now this game would end in a draw. King e6, king goes back, and he takes the pawn. And a great game by both these fighters who have played really well. Caruana pressing, Pragg defending. First game ends in a draw. Now Pragg will have white pieces. What was very nice to see was both of them analyzing after the game for nearly 7 to 8 minutes, trying to get the thoughts of their opponent. And in the end, I think the fair play officer came and said that they both need to come to do the fair play checks. Pragg, as always, puts his score sheet, and I think he'll also arrange the board, because that's how he likes to do, sets up the board pieces. The fair play officer is actually waiting for him there and says, leave it. But of course, Pragg wants to keep it all in order.